If you walk into the Louvre Museum in Paris today, you will find a thick crowd of thousands of people holding up their phones. They are all trying to get a picture of one very specific piece of wood. That piece of poplar wood holds the Mona Lisa, and it currently carries an estimated valuation of nearly $1 billion. It is the most heavily guarded, climate-controlled portrait on Earth. This diagram shows the actual scale of the painting compared to a human. At just 77 centimeters tall and 53 centimeters wide, it is surprisingly small. Up close, it is also quite dull and yellow. Over the centuries, the heavy coat of varnish applied to protect the wood from moisture has bleached and faded, masking the original bright colors. So why did this specific, tiny, yellowing painting become the most recognizable image in human history? The answer lies in a strange contradiction. The portrait was obsessively engineered by a Renaissance scientist, but it only achieved global fame because of a remarkably bold Italian thief. Leonardo da Vinci approached art as a strict branch of science. He was a polymath who studied geology, botany, and optics, and he used that deep scientific knowledge to inform his brushstrokes. To perfect his understanding of the human form, da Vinci spent nights in the hospitals of Florence dissecting human cadavers. He meticulously peeled back skin to map exactly how the muscles of the neck and arms connected to the skeleton. This logic flow maps out his specific obsession with the face. Da Vinci documented the tiny, highly numerous muscles that control human lips. He even went so far as to dissect horses to compare these human expressions to equine anatomy, mapping exactly which nerves fired to pull a mouth into a smile. When he sat down to paint, he approached the subject as a biological puzzle. He reverse-engineered the underlying physical mechanisms of a human expression. He applied this precision using a technique called sfumato. Sfumato is a method of blurring outlines, blending colors so smoothly that the subject's features seamlessly melt into the background, without hard edges. This diagram illustrates how Da Vinci used sfumato to manipulate the human eye. When you focus directly on her mouth, you are using the center of your retina, called the fovea, which picks up fine details. What your fovea sees here is a mostly flat line. She doesn't look very happy. But when you look up at her eyes, her mouth falls into your peripheral vision. Your peripheral vision is much better at picking up shadows. Because Da Vinci blurred the edges of her cheeks with dark sfumato shading, your eyes interpret those peripheral shadows as the upward curve of a smile. The famous mystery of her expression is an intentional, interactive optical illusion. Da Vinci literally painted a smile that only exists when you aren't looking directly at it. The woman who sat for this illusion was Lisa Giocondo, a 24-year-old Italian woman who wore a thin veil, often associated with mourning, likely because she recently lost her infant daughter. But despite her family commissioning the portrait in 1503, Da Vinci never actually delivered it to them. Instead, he carried the wooden panel with him for 15 years, constantly tweaking the shadows. When King Francis I invited him to France in 1516, Da Vinci brought the unfinished painting along, working on it until his death. Da Vinci's endless tinkering is evident in other versions of the subject. This is the Isleworth Mona Lisa, an earlier experimental version painted by Da Vinci, featuring a noticeably younger Lisa and distinct columns flanking the background. Fellow Renaissance artist Raphael created this pen and ink sketch of the same composition around 1504, suggesting Da Vinci's ongoing experiments were heavily studied in the Florence art community. Yet, despite a lifetime of scientific obsession, the painting sat in the Louvre for over a century, largely ignored by the public. In 1911, the average person on the street had no idea what the Mona Lisa was. That changed on a Monday morning in August 1911. Vincenzo Peruggia, an Italian nationalist and Louvre employee, spent the night hiding in a museum closet. The next morning, he took this 77-centimeter painting off the wall, wrapped it in a blanket, and simply walked out the door. The sheer audacity of stealing from the French government triggered an absolute media frenzy. For the next 2 years, the missing portrait was the most heavily reported news story on the planet. Detectives scoured the globe, but the real spectacle was back in the Grand Gallery of the Louvre. Thousands of people lined up just to stare at the empty spot on the wall where the painting used to be, drawing a larger crowd than the actual art ever had. The heist stripped the Mona Lisa of its status as a quiet museum piece and turned it into an international pop culture phenomenon. Perugia kept the portrait hidden in his apartment for 2 years before finally trying to sell it to an art dealer in Florence. The dealer immediately recognized the stolen property and called the police, leading to Perugia's arrest and the capture of these fingerprints and mugshots. When it finally returned to Paris in 1914, it was no longer just a piece of art. It was a celebrity. During the 2 years it was missing, its image had been printed on millions of newspapers and postcards to aid the manhunt, making the face of Lisa Giocondo more recognizable than almost any living person in Europe. Leonardo da Vinci spent 15 years perfecting a shadow using anatomical science, creating a masterpiece that only needed a world-class scandal